Hello, everyone. My name is Madison Lee, and welcome to my theory deep dive presentation on uncertainty reduction theory. This is for our applied communication theory class with Dr. Vickery, and let's go. So, just a little preview of what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. First, I'm just going to tell you directly what uncertainty reduction theory is by its definition. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of uncertainty reduction theory, who created it, why did they create it, things of that nature. And then I'm going to talk about the purpose of uncertainty reduction theory and its main features. And then I'm going to discuss some of the applications of the theory, new scholarship that might have come up, how it's applied in different contexts, things of that nature. And then at the end, I have a discussion prompt for you guys to look at and discuss afterwards if you would like to join me in the conversation. And then I have my references to show you. So, what is uncertainty reduction theory? Dayton and Zelli define uncertainty reduction theory by seeking to explain and predict when, why, and how individuals use communication to minimize their doubts when interacting with others. In its original form, uncertainty reduction theory was seen primarily for interpersonal contexts, but we'll see later on that it develops more into that. Overall, it looks at how people reduce uncertainty when meeting new people or in new environments because people are motivated to gain information about their social environment to increase the predictability of interactions or situations. So, a little bit about the history of uncertainty reduction theory. It was developed by Charles Berger and Richard Calabrese in 1975. Charles Berger was an American professor of communication at the University of California, Davis, and they developed this theory because they wanted to examine the initial entry stage of an interpersonal interaction. So, when you meet someone for the first time, and they were really looking for information gathering on basis of characteristics like sex, age, economics, or social status, and other demographic features like that. And at the time, it was really considered a trailblazing theory because it was one of the first theories to originate in interpersonal communication studies. Unfortunately, Charles Berger has since passed. I believe it was 2018 that he passed away, but his ideas are still being studied today and even challenged. So, also a little bit about the history of uncertainty reduction theory is that it is considered a social scientific theory. It holds a lot of the same features that social scientific theories hold, like it looks to seek and explain behavior and as well as predict it. And it also looks to generalize the behaviors of a population, and it has a set of truths that do this. These truths are what Berger and Calabrese called axioms. There are 8 axioms of uncertainty reduction theory that Dan and Zelli talk about in the textbook. There's verbal communication, nonverbal warmth, information seeking, self disclosure, reciprocity, similarity, liking, and shared networks. A lot of these axioms have a cause and effect relationship. For instance, with verbal communication, it says that as uncertainty reduces, verbal communication will increase, meaning as uncertainty goes down because you're learning more about that person, you will want to talk more to them. So, therefore, verbal communication will go up, and vice versa. Uncertainty reduction theory also aligns with the socio-psychological tradition as established by Craig. It is defined in Dayton and Zelli's textbook as communication as expression, interaction, and influence. It looks at situations that cause behavior and how the psychology, like their people's attitudes, plays a role in people's behavioral actions as well. One axiom of the uncertainty reduction theory that I wanted to kind of challenge was the liking axiom. I have it kind of highlighted right there. It says that reduced levels of uncertainty produce increased levels of liking, meaning the more you learn about someone, your uncertainty goes down, and therefore your liking for that person goes up. However, I would argue that that might not be the case for everything. For instance, you may be learning about someone and your uncertainty might go down, but your liking might necessarily not go up either. I know I've met people who I've learned more about, and as I learned more about them, I realized that we didn't have the same values or communication styles, and so therefore my liking for them went down. So that is something that Dayton and Zelli, as well as Berger and Calabrese, don't quite touch upon, and I think it's something important to kind of challenge in this theory. So, the purpose of uncertainty reduction theory is to minimize unpredictability of interactions with others through information gathering. What we said before, the more you learn about something, the less anxious and uncertain you feel. So, uncertainty reduction theory adopts a post-positivistic orientation towards inquiry. Post-positivistic basically means to recognize that communication can be studied in an evidence science-based manner, but also recognizes that people aren't 100% predictable and that there are exceptions. Along with that, there are also two types of uncertainty people want to reduce. There's cognitive uncertainty and behavioral uncertainty. Cognitive uncertainty is doubts people experience about their own or maybe others' beliefs. And then behavioral uncertainty is questions people might have about their own or others' actions. So, what are some of uncertainty reduction theory's main features? Well, there are three conditions that drive us to reduce uncertainty. First, there's the anticipation of future events. This means if you are likely to see that person again, you might be more encouraged to gather information in order to reduce uncertainty. One thing that comes to mind for me is first dates. If you suspect that you might want to go on a date with that person again, you might try to gather as much information as you can to reduce uncertainty about that person or maybe feel more comfortable the next time you go on the date. The second condition that drives us to reduce uncertainty is incentive value. This is when gathering information and reducing uncertainty has a reward or value attached to it. Basically, you think to yourself, what can this person do for me? And then the third condition that drives us to reduce uncertainty is deviance. This is when a person's unusual or unexpected behavior causes one to reduce uncertainty because you want to know what's going on and try and understand them. So you try to gather more information in order to do that. In addition to those conditions, there are also three uncertainty reduction strategies. There's passive strategy, active strategy, and interactive strategy. Passive strategy is when people observe others from a distance. So you're not directly talking to that person and you're not even really gathering any information from them verbally. You might be examining their nonverbal movements, their clothes, artifacts like that to kind of get an understanding of who they are to reduce your uncertainty. And then there's active strategy. This is asking a third party for information, whether it's asking someone's friend or their family, colleague, things of that nature. And then there's also interactive strategy. Interactive strategy is just talking to someone directly face to face and having that interpersonal interaction with them. It's also the quickest way to reduce uncertainty because you are getting information from them directly. Now, one strategy that Dayton and Zelli do not discuss is extractive strategy, which I'll elaborate on later on in the presentation and why it's important and why I think it should be added to textbooks like Dayton and Zelli. Now, as I mentioned before, Berger and Calabrese's purpose for uncertainty reduction theory was mostly to be used in interpersonal contexts. However, as time progressed and more people decided to look into uncertainty reduction theory, they found it actually was applicable in other contexts as well as relationship communication, intercultural communication, organizational communication, and health communication, and even family communication. So I found a unique article by Myers who examined how marital strength and uncertainty affected the odds of child planning and or having a child. And they were able to come up with this concept called the uncertainty reduction theory of parenthood, which they believed that couples seeked parenthood as an avenue to reduce uncertainty in their lives in marriage, meaning they had kids in order to reduce uncertainty. However, the study found different results from their original hypothesis, but it still coincided with the frameworks of uncertainty reduction theory in that they found that couples who actually worked to reduce uncertainty actually gained greater marital strength and therefore were more likely to plan or have children together. I also found that uncertainty reduction theory can be applied to discourse of relevant events. For example, I found that uncertainty reduction theory was applied to the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. There was a study done in 2004 by Boyle who found that people who held stronger negative emotions towards 9/11, such as fear or anxiety, reported greater efforts to reduce uncertainty about the attacks or their life after the attacks through information seeking. So after the 9/11 attacks, there was a lot of uncertainty, right? People were worried what was going to happen to our country afterwards, what our government was going to do, what the rest of our world was going to look like after this changed the landscape of it. So people went to go look for information to reduce their uncertainty and gain a better understanding of what our world would look like, whether that was reading articles or watching news conferences at the time or even watching the footage of the attacks themselves just to gain an understanding of what was going on. And as of recording this, it is a couple days after 9/11. So I do think this theory and this concept still holds true as we still do this to this day. We often go back and watch those videos and we still feel uncertain about what happened that day. But those videos kind of reduce our uncertainty because we try to understand them more by watching those sources. So there actually has been quite a bit of scholarship written since Dayton and Zelly published their textbook in 2023, and there's been a variety of different topics that uncertainty reduction theory has been applied to as well. The first one I found was in coinciding with AI. So, an article I found was using uncertainty reduction theory to explain information seeking and how that can help people become less resistant to AI because they believed that people are hesitant of AI because they're ill informed and perceive it as dangerous because they don't know anything about AI and its benefits. So they believe that by uncertainty reduction theories frameworks that if they learn more, then they'll feel less uncertain and therefore more comfortable with AI as a platform. And there was a study that came out this year actually that examined how explainable AI can help build users' trust in AI and therefore reduce uncertainty. So explainable AI is a company that was founded by Elon Musk and it helps to make AI's decision making clearer and more processable to humans to understand. And their hope is that by giving this information in a digestible way, then people will feel more inclined to accept AI. This also aligns with the axiom 3 that Berger and Calabrese developed, which is information seeking. Another piece of scholarship I found surrounded organizational communication. So I found a study by Pang that came out last year that explored how strategic human resource management would influence positive emotions at work among new faculty members at research oriented universities in China. And they hoped that this would therefore better their socialization and then cause less turnover rates. So the results showed that strategic human resource management actually helped increase the socialization, which reduced uncertainty about being at a new job or a new environment, and therefore influence positive emotions at work. There's also been the introduction of new concepts since Berger and Calabrese's theory came out in 1975. I mentioned earlier that there were three strategies that Dayton and Zelly do not mention, or sorry, there are three strategies that Dayton and Zelly do mention in the textbook: active, passive, and interactive. But there is one that they do not mention, and that's because it came out later than what Berger and Calabrese had originally developed, and that is extractive strategy. This was introduced by Ramirez in 2002, and extractive strategy is applying uncertainty reduction theory to an online context. So it's searching for information online. So it studied how people use the internet and early social network sites to gain information about others in informal settings. And they found that using those social network features like commenting on someone's page, posting something, sharing, overall just personalizing one's profile allowed for information to be collected covertly and without the target's knowledge. And I do think the extractive theory is important because although it doesn't happen in a face to face interpersonal interaction, I would argue it is interpersonal. It's just from an online perspective, which is done commonly more now since it was 20 years ago. And while Dayton and Zelly do not recognize extractive strategy in their textbook, other recent textbooks do. Like in my undergrad, we read a communication theory book, and it did recognize extractive strategy as one of the strategies. So that's something to consider as well. So I do have a discussion prompt for you guys to look at and to reply to if you feel curious and that you want to add your 2 cents. So, my discussion prompt for you is, can you pull examples from your own lives where you have used the four uncertainty reduction strategies, whether that's passive, active, interactive, and I've added extractive? If so, which do you feel was most effective and why? Maybe you've used all of them, or maybe you haven't used one. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. These are my references, but thank you so much for watching my presentation. I am excited to learn about your theories, and I hope that you learned something from my theory and even maybe learned it altogether is new, or maybe you learned a specific thing that you didn't know before. But in any case, thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see your presentations.